Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Vedic Astrology Podcast. My name is Fiona Marks. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by fellow Vedic astrologer Laura Barat. Laura, welcome back to the Vedic Astrology Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
It's been a while since we've had you on the show, and just remind everyone a little bit about the kind of astrology that you're into and how people may have come across you already.
I do tropical Vedic astrology. I do the healing aspect of it, the counseling aspect of it, and also predictions. I like to make predictions. And I've been doing this for a very long time, almost 30 years now. And I have actually branched out into other realms of astrology, and I incorporate some of those techniques into my practice. I just love astrology. It doesn't really matter where it's coming from. I started with and have become an expert in tropical Vedic, but if I see other types of astrology, I use those as well. So that work that I've tested and that work. So I've been doing that. And also I'm creating classes now to eventually put up a subscription service to a school. So I'm teaching all of my techniques. They're not ready yet, but they will be soon. If you check back at my website, you'll see when they come up, I'll have a subscription service, and I'm going to be sharing all of my knowledge that I have gained by doing this for so many years.
I'm so excited to hear that, Laura, because I've learned so much from you. And for people that follow the podcast and support me on Patreon will know that last year we did a whole year of Vashafal using the solar return techniques as a way of understanding a motivational phrase for each member of the group, and we went through for a whole year, and that was all based on the video course that I did with you on Vashafal. So I'm super excited that you'll be sharing more courses. And just for people listening, what is your website?
It's Laura Barat astrologer.com. So my name is Laura Barat. Barat. Astrologer.com.
That's great. And we'll put that in the notes as well. But just in case for everybody listening, you definitely want to keep your eye out for the new subscription service. Meanwhile, it was in the context of doing Vashafal last year that I reached out to Laura and we had a chat about Shahams, didn't we? About the Punya Shaham and how to calculate it. And we went through some more. And as we were in that conversation, I dropped in that I was really interested in this transition of perimenopause and menopause itself, because I find myself in that period of time in life, and I'm definitely enjoying experiencing myself in new ways, growing in certain ways, letting go of certain other things. It's a very stimulating time in life as an adult to go through such a significant change. And I'm interested in understanding what Vedic astrology can share with us about this transition in a woman's life, and also what mythology might support that, and what wisdom we can tap into to reclaim this transition as something empowering, a springboard to the next part of our journey. And until now, I haven't really been exposed that much to mythology and astrology around menopause. So I reached out to Laura and asked if she would be willing to come and talk to me a little bit about it. And here we are. So with that kind of framework, it's pretty broad. Are you also interested in this transition? And how do you think it fits with astrology and mythology?
It is an extremely significant time in a person's life. And it is a rite of passage. It's an initiation. And it's a biological process. And most of what is out there about menopause is all within the realm of extreme negativity, and it scares people. And that's why I think it's important to get out the psychological and mystical and spiritual connection that menopause points to or indicates, rather than telling people, oh, everything goes downhill from here. It's actually the opposite of that. And I'll just start with an example for what menopause is, the symptoms of menopause, and how they relate to mythologies around the Crone. So there's 3 planets associated with menopause and the Crone stage. One of them is Saturn, of course. Saturn rules old age, but it's for both sexes. It's for everyone. Saturn rules that for everyone. And it's not specifically for women, but it does have a bearing on how our old age progresses, especially after age 70, because that's when we go into a Saturn period. But Saturn just rules aging in general and the process of letting things go and getting rid of things and dissolving attachments. When Saturn transits this 12th house, which is a 2.5-year transit, usually you go through a period of things come to their natural end. You just start to naturally detach from certain things in your life. Usually they are around the houses that Saturn rules, but not always. And so the whole letting go process, the process of shedding or getting rid of things that don't belong in your life anymore, because they aren't part of you. They aren't who you are as an individual. And so you're going to allow them to just leave your life. That's Saturn. So Saturn has a big role in that area. Then the second planet that is menopause, and to me, that is the biggest indicator of menopause, is Rahu. And the reason that is because Rahu is female, specifically female, and Rahu gives the results of Saturn. So Rahu carries a lot of those connotations of what Saturn means as well. Saturn is a separating planet, and so is Rahu. Now, Rahu also indicates things that have to do with psychic powers and different planes of existence and witchcraft and all that kind of stuff. Not to say that every woman that goes through menopause is going to move in that direction. That's not what I'm saying. But when we go through this process where we cannot produce children anymore, and us human beings as mammals, so female humans and whales, and specific types of whales, like killer whales, false killer whales, a few other types of whales, are the only mammals that go through menopause. And they say that menopause, because we go through this, allows us to live longer. So when we lose this ability to have children and we transition from the mother stage, I don't even like to say mother because a lot of women are not mothers, but you have the maiden and then you have the kind of middle age part of life, and then you have the crone age. But when we transition between that, we actually go through an initiation, and it's a spiritual initiation, and it has been long forgotten. When we were menstruating, a few days before the period comes, they say the door to between the worlds open, and you start to get a lot of really strong intuition. It's just a very psychic time. Now, when we stop menstruating, those connections become part of us all the time. And in the Celtic tradition, when you went through your crone age, they immediately thought you had these special powers. And they were honored. They were appreciated. You felt good about entering this part of your life because it was something that was honored and appreciated and recognized and validated. Now the only thing is, because we live in dire materialism, and not to say that technology is bad. I don't think that. I know everyone thinks, or that having things in your life to make your life easier is something negative, or I don't want to be a neo-Luddite. That's not what I'm talking, but there is a grip on people through media and through certain types of belief systems that makes materialism a big part of our lives and focuses people onto what they don't have. And they're always in this state of anxiety of trying to acquire something that will give you some personal power, where we already have that personal power. And we were made to believe that we were lacking in all of these different ways, especially when women go through this change, because then you're leaving behind certain fertility and youthfulness and things like that that are all glorified. But when you move into that other stage, you're giving up that for something even higher. And that is the wisdom, that is certain connections to nature that we can automatically see. Some people call it intuition, or a certain divinity that we can always access, and a certain calmness. So when women start researching menopause, when they start feeling the symptoms, they say, oh, your hair's going to fall out. You're going to get angry. You're going to be mad at everybody. Just a lot of negative and extreme things happen. And I didn't notice a lot of those symptoms for me personally. And some people do have quite a few symptoms, but the one thing that does happen that seems to be universal is a couple of things: hot flashes, and then feelings of anxiousness, irritability. And I experienced that minimally, but I did experience it. And the hot flashes is something that I got really interested in, and I wanted to understand that more on a mystical, spiritual level. And all of these things started coming when I was researching it that I had learned about 20 years prior. So they don't really know why you get hot flashes. I just want to say out front, they don't know why. They'll say, oh, it's because your estrogen is low or it's spring. That's not actually true. They don't know that for sure. They're just guessing. If you go really do the research and go into the studies they've done on it, they have no idea why you get hot and have night sweats. And some will say, oh, you need to take certain things like black cohosh or whatever to try to up your estrogen, and then they'll minimize. And one reason they think it's linked to estrogen is because women who do HRT, which is hormonal replacement therapy, tend to have a lessening of those symptoms of hot flashes and night sweats. They haven't linked it for sure. That it's not set in stone. It's not something they can prove, basically. So I started thinking about the hot flashes. And when we get hot, so that's immediately associated with Mars. And Mars is a planet also that cuts you off from things. And in the mythology they have in Irish mythology, it's called the Cailleach, a Gaelic word, and that's the Crone. And then in the Greek, they have Hecate. And they have all of this strong power. They even say that the Cailleach created the country of Scotland. She's like the progenitor of Scotland. But what happens is the women, they are disconnected. They have gone through a spiritual initiation where they aren't as connected to have these familial and friendship emotional connections that are overwhelming. And it's like they've gone through what I call the recapitulation. It's basically was mentioned before by someone named Carlos Castaneda, based on other traditions in indigenous cultures and certain Amerindian cultures. But they do have basically the same thing in Tibet from the Bon religion. But basically what it is, it's a breath technique where you relive your life and you breathe in and breathe out and you turn your head from side to side and you take in from the remembering things intensely, especially experiences that were traumatic. You take back your energy and then you give back whatever energy somebody else was leaving in you from whatever situation that was. And in a lot of ways, that's what they call the soul retrieval. It's very connected to that as well. It's also connected to a more modern technique called EMDR, where it's rapid, where you move your eyes from side to side. So you're moving from side to side and you're breathing with that, breathing in and out. And that's the recapitulation. Essentially what it does is it gives you back your energy. It gives you back your wholeness. And when you have that, you have the stamina to enter into other worlds and to see other planes of existence. And you start losing I don't want to say ego, because most people would say ego, all right? But ego is actually something we need. There's a difference between ego and self-importance and always getting offended by things and losing energy through your emotional attachment to how you want to be viewed. That's basically what it is. So this is what's happening when you're getting hot flashes, especially when it triggers memories. I started to analyze when I would start to get hot flashes, and it's usually because you think of a memory. Something triggers a memory. It can be just something really fleeting, and something reminds you, or someone says something to you that reminds you of something that happened before. And it doesn't have to be a negative memory. It's just a memory. That is the automatic method of recapitulation. Women go through this at menopause without having to do anything. After the process, they feel a lot more detachment, and just healthy detachment. And that isn't, and they aren't, if they're letting go of these experiences, and what you consciously have to bring up some memories that were not that pleasant, and then let them go and breathe in with that hot flash. That's what they're for. Because that's what the heat does. Mars is heat in the body. It's also the electricity in the nerves. When we get a fever, that's Mars. That's the body's way of burning out the sickness or the illness. So it raises our temperature. And the same thing happens during the hot flash. In hot flashes, it's burning out something. And what it's burning out is our unhealthy connection, where we left our energy as women before going through this transition. To me, that is something that has been lost in the knowledge. It is very difficult to find. You get a lot of modern woo on menopause when you try to connect it, but you have to go back into the myths and the stories to really get a clearer picture of how women can go through this and not be afraid of it, and honor it in a way that it should be honored, and care for themselves.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Being in a woman's body, all of that reproductive, fertile, all of those organs are completely hidden. And so the experience of transitioning from a girl's body to the fertile body also happens in this hidden or introverted kind of way. It comes and happens to you without an instruction manual, right? It just transforms. And there used to be, in generations like my mother's generation and before, there was a lot of shame about beginning to menstruate, right? It was something to keep hidden, and it was something inconvenient, and that nobody should know what's going on with you. And if there's any evidence of it, it should be invisible to anybody. Absolutely nobody should know that it's happening. And I feel that has, in my generation and the children that we have now, it's such a comfortableness, and hopefully that will continue, that this is a human experience, and I'm experiencing it right now, and it's affecting me in this way, and it's messy, and I'm not quite the same person that I am when I'm menstruating as I am the other weeks of the month. There's a bit more comfort that our experience, we can extrovert it, this female experience, we can be more comfortable with it. And I think that I've also witnessed that during that fertile period of life. I feel like this generation has also been a bit more comfortable with vocalizing the experience of miscarriage and the experience of fertility. That's not always 100% every time a healthy baby that goes on to live a full life. I think there's been a bit more honesty as well about where percentage of miscarriages that are perfectly normal and perfectly healthy, and part of every fertile cycle is the body has a mechanism for understanding whether this is viable or not viable and how it's going to deal with it, just that wisdom of the body. And I also feel we are regaining some wisdom and power around menopause and finding it something empowering, something not to be ashamed of. We don't have to hide it, or we don't have to pretend that we're the same person before as we are after, and that we are in a transition. So I hope that continues, this kind of reclaiming and, like you say, returning to the ancient stories that helped us. But before we go with some ancient stories, which is what I'm really looking forward to, let me just come back to a couple of things that we've mentioned in this part of the discussion. You talked about 3 planets. Is that Saturn, Rahu, and Mars? Are those the 3 that you're referring to?
No, the third planet is the Earth. The Earth becomes so important. It rules all humans because we're all living here. Actually, it's part of us because we eat what is coming from the Earth, we breathe the air, we drink the water, we are the Earth. This is a part of astrology that is not really used that much. It's starting to be a little more, but basically it's taking the Earth and looking at the constellation exactly opposite the sun. Some people call it the Earth's shadow, but that's what's considered to be the Earth's position in astrology. And you can use this in tropical astrology. You can do it, let's say, using my example, I have my sun in Pisces, so my Earth would be in Virgo. But the way I do it, and some other astrologers, is you take the Earth and you look at the constellation rather than the tropical sign. For me, that would be the lion. And I like to use the animal name for the constellation rather than saying Leo, because Leo is the tropical sign. The constellation is the lions. So all that you would do is find your sun sign and to see what constellation it's in. That's usually 24 degrees behind. Just do the sidereal method, but you don't use sidereal, you use the constellations, because sidereal signs are equal 30-degree sections, and this constellation of Virgo is huge. It's 90, or I can't remember, but it's a huge constellation. Then the constellation of the crab is very small. So that's what you would do. What the Earth symbolizes in a chart is what we have to give. What we have to give to our community, the Earth, other people in general, and our community at large. What are our gifts that are going to manifest on the Earth? And those gifts are seen through that constellation. It's not psychological, like tropical signs, psychological tendencies and characteristics. It's more gifts you're given or potentials. The potential you have to give to the Earth or all the creatures on it. And it doesn't even have to involve other humans. It can be for animals or for oceans or whatever. Or the knowledge you have to give, the talents you have to develop and give back to the Earth. And that usually comes later in life. And after the woman has gone through the change, has gone through menopause, I wish there was another word we could associate with it, because there's such a negative connotation, menopause. But anyway, that's all we have for now. But that those potentials easily come out more because you have the lessened attachments. And I joined all of these menopause groups on Facebook because I wanted to see people talking about it, what they were saying, what they were going through, how the average woman experiences this if they aren't really into what we're into, astrology or spirituality in general. Just see what they're saying. And I noticed that they were very irritable. One woman said it very well. She said, I just want everybody to go away. And then she said, I can see being an old crone and going off and living in the forest and growing my herbs and making my potions. That's what she said. I can totally relate to that. And that's it. We become detached and our emotional involvement is lessened. But if we still try to hang on to that and try to feel the same way we did before, then I think that causes problems.
I think it's so interesting that sometimes you hear it said that women go through menopause so they can look after other people's children, look after their grandchildren or whatever it is. And I'm in the process. So maybe I've got a skewed perspective, and maybe after I go through this, I will feel differently. But as I go through this process, I feel less interested in looking after children. It's not that I don't like them, but I don't feel that kind of magnetic fertility pull that I want to sacrifice my interests and everything and my time and whatever and my resources to raise children. And that's definitely what I felt during my fertile period. I've never been happier than when I was a young mum, and it was just glorious. I loved it. But as I go through this transition, I'm very happy that kids are around and I really want them to have a future. And I guess you become more interested in providing a planet that's sustainable for life to continue growing, rather than specifically wanting to give your time to daily care of children. So I think it's very interesting that it's sometimes advertised that menopausal women are child carers or something. I'm like, I don't know. That doesn't seem to click with me.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. I really don't. Especially if it's becoming more difficult, because if it's a difficult transition, and a lot of times it will be for some people, if they haven't dealt with some of the issues and some of the traumas they've experienced, if they haven't dealt with that and tried to heal that, it can be really difficult. We're all walking around with wounds, but when you're going through the menopause, your body, I absolutely am convinced that your body wants to heal those things and wants you to purge the pain, so you can move on into wisdom. That's another name is a wise woman, the Kayach, with wise woman. And you move into wisdom by forming a healthy detachment, and you're connected to the source, the earth. And through that connection, you're able to give in a way that is beneficial to whoever is open to it. But you're not doing it out of a personal, I'll just give myself as an example because I've been through it and I'm not triggered and offended nearly as much as I was. And I can see the process of life. I was thinking about watching the earth and going through the ages and the erosion and the development of mountains, and just think of all that massive amount of time, billions of years, how insignificant certain things are. And that when you losing a lot of your energy, when you don't have that healthy detachment, that is usually around an image we want to promote or that we want other people to see about us. That's a huge energy drain. And then on top of that, I think a lot of people go through some severe physical symptoms, menopausal physical symptoms like losing sleep, insomnia. There's just basically general aches and pains. That is also attached to the body changing. It wants to metamorphose into the wisdom goddess that we all have in us. But in order to do that, some of those past traumas need to be purged. And that, of course, is the job of Saturn. And then also Rahu. Rahu is going to give new experiences and pushes us to feel something new as the old is being purged away. But the ones who have serious physical symptoms, that can be because of the attachment and the traumas that haven't been dealt with yet. And it's a prompt for you to deal with those things. But also, we have a very toxic diet. Not you guys so much in Europe, but here in the United States, that's a real problem. And it's all connected. The food you eat, your physical body, your emotional state, your habits, and your habitual reactions to certain things that have developed from traumas that have not been healed. That's what I call self-sabotage. And so when a woman reaches menopause, the body is doing the recapitulation, like I was saying before, but also it's doing a shake-off, like a shimmer, a shimmy. It's wanting to expel through the heat and burn away what doesn't belong anymore. Also, the obsessively concerned with looks. There's different circles and types of people. Some people aren't really that concerned with it, but I know that there are a lot of women who are still very concerned about how they look after they go through menopause. And there's nothing wrong with that. Wanting to look your best, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not criticizing it at all. But when it's causing distress and causing a woman to discredit herself or devalue herself, then that is a problem. Because it's just a natural aging process. And the byproduct of that detachment is a less concern with being regarded as beautiful or pretty or sexy or whatever that we had up until this process. So the earth, I was saying the earth has a lot to do with menopause, and it's connected to the wise woman, or the Kayach, as they call them, or Hecate. So you find your innate talent, what your gifts are that you can give through the constellation of the earth when you were born, which is opposite the sun's position. So they each have something to give. For the lion, it is a fight and fierceness, or the beauty that kills, or the beauty that fights, the power that is able to fight for something that's important. But every position, constellational position, points to something. Now, if you happen to have the earth in Virgo, that's a really good sign, because Virgo is actually the wisdom goddess in a lot of traditions. The Virgin, I should say, not Virgo, the Virgin represents the wisdom goddess. So that really connects a person to carrying those secrets, carrying those mysteries through generations. Usually that means that the goddess will speak through her directly, especially when she's out in nature. So the sign of Virgo represents a young girl, a prepubescent girl who's innocent, connected to the earth, and it's got this really strong innocence quality about it. It's providing life all the time and not asking for anything in return. But if you find your constellation, there is a different lesson, different talent, different potential that can be expressed in the later years.
And so can people have a look at that combination of Saturn and Rahu and someone's Earth's position? Are those factors that people could look at in their chart that give some insight into their transition?
Absolutely, definitely. There's some really interesting parts of this. So you'll look at the state of Saturn in your chart to show you some of the lessons that will come up as you go through this transition. Also, the position of Rahu in your natal chart, but also in transit. Because as you go through this process, so they say it's a year, right? You have to go through a year of not having your period, then you went through menopause. That is a transit, or more or less, of one of the nodes. And Jupiter actually takes a year, but the nodes take a year and a half to move through a sign or a house. So it's really important as you go through this to see where Rahu is transiting. And that's going to be a theme that you carry into your wisdom years. And that you, in a way, where you really have a lot to say about it, and where you can give a lot of wisdom and higher knowledge around it. Some people, like in my case, I'm going through the nodal return. And I don't know if we were talking about this before, because I love the nodal return is huge. It's much more important than the Saturn return even. So it happens every 18.6 years. That's a cycle of the nodes. And there's a half nodal return, which is also extremely important. That's a 9.3 year cycle. When you have a nodal return, you take the exact moment and you're using the true node setting. And so we just cast a chart like you would for a solar return, but just do it for the nodal return and do it for the half nodal return from your place of birth, not where you live. And that's going to show you a definite theme for the next 9.3 or 18.6 years. And the nodes exist because of the Earth. And there is a whole branch of astrology, and this is one of the classes I'm going to teach, which can just be done with the sun and moon and Earth and the nodes alone, without any of the planets. And that nodal return becomes very important to see those next years in your life, the evolution you're going to go through. I would even say it's almost like you cast another birth chart. And if you go back and do those nodal returns and half nodal returns and look and see, oh yeah, my life had this really strong emphasis on the fifth house, or really I had this certain yoga that made me successful in my career, or whatever it is, you're going to see that in a nodal return. And the position of the nodes becomes the most important. And everybody's going through a nodal return around the age of 55, 56, and then 9 years before that, 47.
That transitional period where there's some irregularity to your menstruation, but more or less you're still menstruating, but you're beginning to get some hot flashes. You're still fertile, but not to the rate that you were. So that could be a 9-year period, perimenopause. It's not a 1-year process. It's a winding down of the hormonal journey that you've been on. It takes time for all of those different checks and balances that were there to find their new position.
You're right. The perimenopause is building up to that time, when your period can be a little wacky. You're having some menopausal symptoms. I went through that, I would say a good 2 years where I stopped. It's very different for everybody. And that is also an arrow pointing to how significant this is, what a life change this is. Because some people go through perimenopause symptoms for many years.
I guess some people need to have a hysterectomy or something for a medical reason, and they go through everything all at once.
Right.
So think about that Saturn, Rahu, and the Earth. Sometimes for some people, all of those indicators will be in the same part of the chart at the same time. And for other people, they'll be a bit spread out, and the process happens in different phases. So something for me to research as I'm looking at charts and go back and have a look at my own chart. One other thing that came to me as you were speaking was, I think when I decided to have a child, when I became pregnant, it really blew my whole conception of how incredible it is that the human body can grow another human being that will then be born and live. It's a really miraculous power that only the female body has. And we're talking about at the very beginning of this conversation, there's a lot of societal and cultural imagery and cultural mythology, modern mythology, that tells you what it is to be a woman and what it is to be attractive or to be useful as a woman, all this kind of stuff. But when you get the chance to be pregnant and give birth, if that's something that you have in your life path, I found that it was eye-opening, and that I really feel in this masculine society that I've grown up in, although I agree it's changing. I come from a lineage that has been through that patriarchal time. Really, femaleness, female bodies rightly should be the goddess. They should be honored. Really, women should be at the center of everything. They should be honored. Their fertility and their needs should be paramount, because nobody can do what we can do. It's just miraculous. And yet, through this historic journey humanity's on, and the bit that I happen to be conscious in now, and this patriarchal background, women have this second-class citizen role, and being a mother's not important. And in fact, you won't earn as much, and you won't get as much superannuation, and you won't get paid for anything you're doing. This fertility power is completely not acknowledged, is diminished. And our fertility power becomes about our attractiveness and our sexiness. How attractive are we? That becomes the only bit that survived this journey, is how attractive we are. And you look at those clay figures from more tribal hunter-gatherer communities of the fertility goddess, and she's round. It's all about how round and full she is. And yet our version of being sexy and attractive has been modeled around maybe a more iconic Barbie doll type of shape that it's hard to let go of. But I was also thinking about not only has this journey that we've been on where femininity has been pushed under or has minimized this amazing goddess power that we have of procreation, but it has also minimized the wise woman who would be the herbal doctor of the community, who would be the person that would solve complex problems, complex life problems, like either health problems or psychological problems. It would be the wise women in the community who had a role of healer, who had a role of doctor. And that the way Western medicine has become also very detached from nature and has become, I treat this very specific thing that can be researched and proved and I can write papers about. And when you walk into my room and I'm the specialist, I'm just looking at this one thing that I'm trained in and in a very detached way, I'm going to improve that one thing. The way that has been removed from nature and has been removed from the role of women. Obviously now we have many women doctors, but this version of Western medical doctors, they originally all were male, and they took away like the midwifery and the herbal and all that kind of stuff. And so whatever we're going to call this patriarchal journey that we've come from has not found ways to honor the goddess, not just in the fertile period, but also in the wise woman period. And that's why in many ways we don't look forward to menopause, because the only thing that the patriarchal thing has said that women is useful for is to be attractive. And so if you're naturally going to lose that, then where is your use? Whereas if we had grown up in you're going to become the doctor of our community, you're going to hold all the knowledge, you're going to be solving the problems that no one can solve, we really look up to you, it's really important to have you here, then this transition becomes something attractive that we want to experience. We're proud to reach this point.
Yeah, that's what it should be, because saying that it's so awful and terrible is doing a horrible disservice. It's a criminal thing to have people so afraid of it. It just makes me a little angry, but
that's the Leo. That's the lion.
I know. We are coming out of that, though. I think we are. When we say we are useful because we lose our attractiveness, and that's just coming from a men's perspective, and not even all men, but it's coming from a male perspective. And that's the thing, too. When you go through this transition, you don't really care what men are projecting on you to be. You don't care at all. Just don't. That's one of the things that got burned out of me. What I would do when a hot flash was coming on is think about something I wanted to recapitulate and take my energy back and expel the foreign energy or do my soul retrieval. See, Rahu also rules going beyond limitations. Rahu rules magic, but it also rules technology. And it allows us to go beyond limitations. And that's what I think that this menopausal process is. Spiritual initiation. It's going beyond limitations because we have a certain personal power. It's reclaiming our Shakti. Is the actual energy in the body. And Shakti means power. So it's a physical thing. Everything is material. It shows up materially. The power is material. You were talking about Saturn being a planet of interest when we're talking about aging. And then you mentioned especially after 70. But in talking to you today, I'm realizing it's interesting that actually at 50, we come into our sun age in that model. And so it really is indicating that as most women will be going through their menopause transition around that 50-year-old point, either a bit before or a bit after, even that model that says our sun becomes the ruler of that age from 50 to 70 is showing us that the true soul, the true inspiration of who we truly are as this woman that we've incarnated this time, becomes available when we've transitioned out of menopause. That's actually when we're the most likely to be able to live in true inspiration. That everything we did before was great and was very helpful and did contribute to the procreation of everybody's spiritual journey. Other consciousness wants to come here and have a spiritual experience, and we've enabled that. But the sun age coinciding with 50, coinciding with menopause, really tells us that our true purpose starts now, once we've stopped being fertile. Absolutely. I totally agree with that.
We've talked now about some of the planetary aspects, but you alluded earlier to mythology that can also help us understand the power of this transition from our
Right.
fertile years to our wise woman years.
So in the Celtic tradition, they have a lot on the crone. They call her the chaos, the hag. They even call her hag. We associate it with a negative connotation, but it wasn't when they came out with the word, and just had a lot of power. She created countries. She knew when the warriors were going to die. She made certain tools for them. There's this whole legend around her making the armor and making the arrows for the warriors that were going to go into battle the next day. And she knew which ones were going to die, basically. In herbs, there's a lot of mythology around that. Now, the Hecate, which is the crone goddess, basically, it's not a young woman. It's an older woman that's gone through menopause and is the goddess of herbs, herbal healing, and also just being a wild woman, offering her wisdom to solve problems like you were talking before in the community. And they're all connected by their spiritual, psychic abilities, their abilities to see what will heal. And somebody told me this, that these wise women, when you went through this process, you became a wise woman and you were able to divine what would heal. You were in communication with the earth, so you knew which herbs to take or which plants would heal, which ones were poisonous, and what did what, basically. And this person said to me that everything we need is right within our environment. The healing power of the earth is in every environment. And if we get sick or have some issues, the cure is within walking distance based on what's growing there. And that's the power of the earth. It has just everything we need. And that's why these women in Hecate especially was able to see what would work and what would cure and what would not. And also able to give certain potions to open up the doors between the worlds. And then also they say if you see the Kayak, like she will appear to you. This is another myth. She will appear to people before they go through a major life change or something really unexpected happens in their lives. If you're connected to that, you can see her. And it can be just if you're downtown or in town or something and you're walking and taking a walk and you just see an old lady and it's weird. She gives you a weird look. That suffice for having that experience. And that happened to me right before I met my husband. I met the man I was going to marry and I saw her, the Kayak. It was really wild. You just know it because they give you a look like, I know you. And it just could be somebody on the street, but it's very overwhelming, mysterious. And also when they had the Oracle at Delphi, all right, so that's also Greek mythology. She was also a witch woman. When they make movies about it, they always have a very young, attractive woman, but she was an old witch woman. That's the mythology behind it, that they all have psychic ability. And to me, that's because we're in that state of those few days before our period. That is with us the rest of our lives. We're always in that state. If we know how to handle it, if we know how to honor it and get in touch with those things. And a lot of it has to do with the healing process. You could help me work on my personal mythology about what's happening. I feel like since I've been going through this experience of perimenopause, it's occurred to me that the uterus or the fertile organs, it's reminding me of a potter's wheel, that on this potter's wheel, you need to keep the clay moist and spinning. And as long as you keep the clay moist and spinning, that potter's wheel will just turn out vessel after vessel. And during that fertile period of your life, that's your service, is to keep your uterus as this moist spinning
production capacity, and the hormones in your body ensure that happens. But then as I'm transitioning through this perimenopausal period, you begin to feel this drying out, and you're realizing that this spinning potter's wheel is going to stop spinning. And to me, then the hot flashes seem to be like the kiln that is firing the final vessel that you're making on this potter's wheel. And that vessel to me is like the clay pots of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is where you can preserve all the knowledge.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Interesting.
You don't want that to be moist and spinning. Your capacity now is to hold wisdom, and that the Dead Sea Scrolls were preserved because they were in clay and in a very dry environment, right? And they survived thousands of years. And where this process of drying out and the hot flashes is like firing that final vessel, making it watertight or strong, whatever waterproofing you do when you fire pottery, so that you can store wisdom. And that
analogy.
And we want to keep that tightly packed. And I think this is really important with the uterus health, isn't it? As we move into wise woman, and that uterus is not receiving that constant moisture from the hormonal cycle, we actually need to keep that area of the pelvic floor and the pelvis itself and the abdomen. There needs to be a kind of health, like these tightly packed skulls. We need to look after that abdominal and pelvic area. And in menopause, talk about gaining belly fat, like it's one of those things that, and that we might, for the first time in our lives, need to work on keeping all of those inner ligaments strong and healthy, because otherwise the uterus can drop and women can have problems with the pelvic floor.
Right.
So it seems to me that there's something about packing in this wisdom of the Dead Sea Scrolls and holding it tight. It's like from that core, powerful place of procreation, that wisdom is really valued and held close, maintained and sustained. So this is the mythology that is coming through my experience of perimenopause.
Such a creative insight, really. Absolutely. I want to steal that.
And what about any houses or signs that you think are particularly important?
I would say the 12th house is the house of retirement. They don't say anything about menopause, of course. It's just been ignored, but taking yourself out of the daily grind, getting away from worldly concerns, relaxation, feeling at one with everything, feeling the oneness, being detached, losing what no longer belongs, that's all the realm of the 12th house. And of course, the 12th house is different states of consciousness, being able to see different planes of existence, being in touch with nature in a divine way, being able to divine just by looking out your window and seeing what the trees are doing. That's all 12th house types of things. And it's so funny you were mentioning like the desert, a dry climate. That's Scorpio.
That's what I was going to ask you. I feel like there's an 8th house, 8th sign kind of energy. The 8th house is the ordeal in the hero's journey, isn't it? It's where you go into the cave not knowing really what you're going to face. And all you know is that when you come out the other side, when you come out the other side, you will be different than when you entered. And I feel like menopause is a bit that kind of 8th.
And definitely, the 8th house is the house of transformation, especially self-transformation. And Scorpio is the sign of transformation. They have the phoenix related to Scorpio too. And interestingly, Scorpio rules deserts. And then the scorpions only come out at night. And scorpions live in deserts. It's interesting how what I call the truth trine with the water houses, they work in cycles. Like all of the houses based on the elements work in a cycle. But the 4th house, the 8th house, and the 12th house connected to Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. So this is why I was talking about the recapitulation so much in the past and taking back your energy from the past, because the 4th house is the beginning of the truth trine. It's the beginning of our spiritual journey. And the 4th house is the house of emotional security and happiness. And the 4th house rules the earth, what we stand on, our understanding. So when we clear out our past, when we reckon our past, then we can move to the 8th house where we go through that transformation, that major, massive transformation. And then we can move to the 12th house where we're in that state of oneness. And then it just keeps going cycle after cycle, but it really becomes pronounced in menopause.
Wow. Laura, we have covered some territory today. I'm sure that many people listening are going to be inspired to have a more peaceful relationship, a more empowering relationship with their transition through perimenopause and menopause.
Yeah, I think it's important to get out into psychological and mystical and spiritual connection that menopause points to or indicates.
Thanks so much for your time, Laura. I can't wait till the next time we get a chance to talk on the Vedic Astrology Podcast.
Oh, thank you so much.
And until then, bye everyone, and bye Laura. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you for having me.